Okay, in our next story, we're going to talk about voter suppression and the lackadaisical non responses that the Biden administration has had towards it. And AOC, who is rallying with Nina Turner, who is in Ohio, rallying in support of Nina Turner, and how she feels about the Biden administration's stance on voter suppression. So it says AOC blasts White House suggestion people can out-organize voter suppression. As Republicans have for months swept the country with laws aimed at suppressing voters, the White House is taking a relatively soft stance on combating such efforts. In response, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez emphasized on Monday that now is the time to fight like hell for democracy. A New York Times report last week found that the attitude surrounding voter suppression laws in the White House is that it's possible to overcome the Republican efforts to get less people to vote. In private, calls with voting rights groups and civil rights leaders, the Times wrote, White House officials and close allies of the president have expressed confidence that it's possible to out-organize voter suppression, according to multiple people familiar with conversations. Ocasio-Cortez responded, saying in a tweet that communities cannot out-organize voter suppression when those they organize to elect won't protect the vote. And even if they do out-organize, the ground is being set to overturn results. Now, what does she mean by this? And why is she right about this 100%? Why can people not out-organize voter suppression? It's because the system is broken. The system is the problem. You cannot fight against a crooked system. You can, but you can't out-organize against it. You need to have allies. You need to have elected officials that have your back, that are going to do what's best for you. And that's the only real way to combat this problem. Now, why is the system broken? And why has it been broken for so long? Well, that's simple. And we're going to do a little history lesson. But if we go back into American history, after where Jim Crow laws were put into place. And these laws were put in place until 1965, until the Civil Rights Movement. And they were never stated to be against a particular color. The Jim Crow laws, even though it's heavily implied that the laws itself were written in a way to deny black voters, they were intentionally not written in that way, but the purpose was to deny black voters, and that's exactly what it did. But it was never written specifically as such. Now, the old Jim Crow, mainly, what they would use is a poll tax, literary tests, and white-only primaries. So a poll tax would be a tax money that you would have to pay to go and vote. And especially in parts of the South, the blacks were too poor to vote. And white people could also not vote if they couldn't afford the tax unless they could prove that their family heritage had voted before the Civil War, which is where the term grandfathered in comes in, the grandfather clause. The literary tests were most definitely anti-black because of how the school systems were set up, but they were also anti-poor, because if you couldn't afford an education, which a lot of poor people couldn't, then you were not going to be able to get in because you would fail the literary test. And the literary test wasn't even just like reading and writing and arithmetic. It consisted of pretty hard questions from the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. like stuff you would have had to gone to school for. It wasn't just a simple test. And finally, the white primary was another big thing they used, which is just what it sounds like. Only white people could vote in the primary. And now this leads us to the new Jim Crow, which are, again, primaries are set up to where independent voters can't vote. You have to be registered as a Democrat or as a Republican, which is a lot of red tape to jump through. There's no same-day registration. And even now, states like Georgia are implementing laws where you can't have water bottles in the line when you go to vote. They're not allowing portable ballots. They're not allowing buses to transport people to the ballots. And this goes on top of felons not being able to vote. Like they always try to keep people down. Why? And this is because the more people come out, the more people vote, the more progressive ideas get enacted. Because the more people vote, it means usually that the more young people are voting. Because old people are going to vote regardless, 9 times out of 10. But when more young people vote and more minorities vote, progressive movements can be enacted. And they don't want that. They're only for they're only for giving empowerment to voters when they're voting on their side. Now, even Fox News said the other day that you should only be able to vote if you have a kid. Talk about voter suppression. And from the Democratic president, or Democratic elected president, we hear crickets. Because Joe Biden is too bipartisan. Joe bipartisan. He will not sign on to the For the People Act, even though it would be very simple. He could. That could be one thing that he could do to stop voter suppression. Or he could strip back the filibuster. He could strip back the filibuster, make it a talking filibuster, or get rid of the filibuster altogether. And make it so a simple majority would have to vote on issues. But no, he doesn't want that either. And why is that? Well, because he doesn't actually believe in these issues. That's one. He's completely delusional. That could be another. Because he thinks that Republicans actually want to work with him. Or it could be something a little bit more sinister. Back in the civil rights era, while Bernie Sanders was marching with Martin Luther King, Joe Biden was working with segregationists to keep separate but equal inside of our schools. So, if you really look at it, nothing has really changed. He's always been comfortable working with the bigots, working with the racists, working with the people who are wrong on the issues. He's always been comfortable with that. But yet, he wants to say a filibuster is a relic of Jim Crow, which was another point echoed by Obama. You know what? He won't do anything about it. You know why? Because what else is a relic of Jim Crow? You. President Biden. I truly believe that, like, look in the mirror. You want to see a relic. You allowing the filibuster to continue and you'll be co-signing on to the gerrymandering that's going to be taking place. They're already reporting that some of the most insane gerrymandering is going to be taking place very soon, and Biden's not going to fight against it. If Biden doesn't do something, if the Democratic Party doesn't do something, and this is why I don't believe it's on the corporatist wing. If the progressive left do not do something to combat these issues, the Democrats may never win again. They may never win another election. We have to take to the streets. We have to rally the people, because that's the only way that we're really going to win. We have to make it so people come out in droves, and there's no denying that our elected officials, the ones that we get into office, will show up and represent us. And not big businesses, not Wall Street, not these super PACs, not nameless, faceless corporations. No, they'll represent us. That's the only way that we're going to be able to do it. Because what the Biden administration is doing now, and what Democrats are doing now, this placating to Republican rule, it's not going to work, and we're gonna end up losing a lot.